Okay, we are in the final stages here, guys, of the Revolutionary War. And we had just left off in our last um, slide talking about Valley Forge and the winter of 1777 and 1778. Just a quick little review. The War for Independence is declared in July 4th of 1776. It will last until 1781. Um, the early stages of the war go very poorly for the colonists and the patriots, and they are very close to being defeated and knocked out um, in the battle for New York, and they are going to have three major victories, and we discussed two of them. And now we're going to end the war with the last major victory. So let's move forward with some of the key players in the Revolutionary War. As mentioned, we sent Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson to France to try to get the French to join our efforts in a war against the English in the Revolutionary War. And the French have quite a few people that come to our aid. And one of the first is an interesting gentleman, Marquis de Lafayette. And Mr. Lafayette is a guy that has money. He's rich. He backs the cause of the Patriots and what the Declaration of Independence is. And he befriends Washington, George Washington. And one of the biggest things he's got money. And so he gives us money to pay for supplies. Remember, we are desperately low. We don't have anything. And Lafayette is going to be one of the few that can afford from his own personal finance. And then he also is going to be, and in the movie that we're going to be watching, I think we've seen, you're going to see Lafayette teaching and training the men during the winter of Valley Forge how to be an organized army. And so far, we've talked about the war primarily in the middle colonies and up north. And what does the war look like in the South? Here in a little bit, we're going to talk about Nathaniel Greene and the movie The Patriot, and Mel Gibson is playing that role of Nathaniel Greene. And let's take a look in the South of what we have going on now. The South has got the most loyalist, those people that are loyal to England, and it's because large plantations have a great deal of wealth, and that wealth is something that most of these colonists are going, why would I want to give this up? I got a pretty good thing going on. And so we're gonna meet the British in the South, and most of the people that are colonists, the biggest number of loyalists in our colonies are going to be in the South. And there's going to be two factors that help us out a lot. First, the Spanish. And the Spanish are going to go to our aid when the French come to our aid. And the Spanish are in Florida. And so the Spanish stop the English from coming up through Florida and advancing from the south and taking New Orleans and Louisiana. They protect that. And one of the main people that they have that is talked about in your book a little bit and in the Revolutionary War is a guy by the name of Bernardo de Galvez. And he is a commander of the Spanish troops, and he protects Louisiana, and it enables us to free up some of our troops to move towards the middle colonies and to the north. And the Spanish are there to protect us, and the British are having to divide their forces. Another important gentleman is again another rich guy. Without these rich guys to finance us, we wouldn't be able to buy a lot of the things the Patriots need. And his name is Jaime Solomon. Mr. Solomon is a Polish Jew who is very rich, and he personally finances the government, the American government, and primarily the forces in the South. So you have two guys one being Spain in Mr. Galvez and them protecting us from being attacked by the British, and then Mr. Solomon, a colonist in our country, migrant that has got a ton of money and gives us help. Another unique individual is a guy by the name of John Paul Jones. And John Paul Jones is born in England, pretty young guy. He only lives to be 45 years old before he dies. And he grows up and he becomes a captain and the British merchant, British merchant ships. And he's a captain in several merchant ships. And he'll eventually flee England because he's kind of a hothead. And he ends up getting into a dispute with one of his sailors, and he ends up killing one of his sailors on his ships, and he knows he's going to have to go to prison for it. He stabs him with a sword, and so he flees to America, where he's going to join the Continental Army or Continental Navy of what we have. We almost have no ships whatsoever in 1775. He does take one of our very, very few naval ships, and he's going to harass the British. He's going to come out of the port of France, and he's going to harass the British off their coast and also off of Ireland. And he's going to make raid after raid, and he's going to capture supplies, and he's going to keep the British somewhat occupied, their British Navy somewhat occupied with what he's doing. He's the famous for the quote after being injured and the British asking, "Do you want to surrender?" He famously replies, and I think some of you may have heard it, I have not yet to begin to fight." And so John Paul Jones is the father of the American Navy. Now let's go on to the last big battle in 1781. Remember, 1776 it starts, 1781 will be the last major battle. We'll declare peace in 1783. But the last major battle was the Battle of Yorktown. And Yorktown is a small community along the Virginia shoreline. So it's in the Atlantic, where we have trapped General Cornwallis and his British troops there. The French have decided to join us, and we attack from three different directions, one from the north, one from the south, and then the French Navy will beat the British Navy, and they will entrap the British soldiers while we will hit them with the French artillery from their naval ships out in the harbor, and then our cannons, both of our two armies, from the south and from the north, where we pound the redcoats and General Cornwallis into finally surrendering. The British are low on morale. They are, they're getting beat by a small, tiny little group of nobodies, and it's frustrating. Supplies are low, morale is low. There's a number of them that are sick, and so finally, after we even, as I mentioned, we've surrounded them on three sides and pounded them, and he can't surrender. Cornwallis will surrender, and that's when the British and Parliament and King George will say, okay, we've got too much vested here. We're just spending too much time and effort here in the New World, and we're going to just back out of it. So they'll surrender, take another 2 years, but Cornwallis will surrender, and that'll be the last major skirmish in the American Revolution in 1781. Again, after you lose the battle, King George and England will abandon all of its ideas of controlling the 13 colonies, and they'll say, okay, we're going to leave. And so what's that look like? So here's, before we get there, the Treaty of Paris, which is in 1783, will officially end the American Revolution. The Treaty of Paris is going to be held in France, and it's going to be with the French as a negotiator between the British and us, and the British will, and King George will recognize all the American colonies from, the north eastern seaboard, all the way east to the Mississippi River down to Florida. We sent 4 prominent members to negotiate peace. John Adams being the primary one. I know that Thomas Jefferson was also there, but to get the British to acknowledge that this is a free, separate country was an enormous accomplishment. And to capture the land that they got is gigantic, as we'll see here with this map right here. Here is what it looks like. North America, Central, and South America. So if you take a look here on this, the United States controls the eastern seaboard, that's the East Coast, all the way over to the Mississippi River, and all the way down to basically Florida, a little bit above Florida, present day. Florida itself and pretty much the Midwest and all of the West Coast and Central Florida is controlled by the British, and the Spanish control all of that. The British control pretty much all of Canada, and then here in the far west of western and northern Canada, you've got